This is a special presentation of Money, Power, and Politics.
You keep me here, I almost died.
This deaf man from Tampa said he could not hear his own trial.
How? You blame me?
And he's still in prison after his brother confessed to framing him for murder.
He was played as a patsy, and he frankly fell right into it.
Okay, Robbie.
This man successfully appealed his conviction, was freed from prison, and turned his life around.
He's got us going to church. He's got us, involved in the schools.
So how could the state send him back?
It's been over a year and you haven't done anything wrong.
So the court is compelling you to serve 9 more years on a law that's since been deemed unconstitutional that the governor has changed.
Correct.
And our team uncovered evidence that freed John Claude Muse. But his case took a twist you may not believe in our investigation of Florida justice from the perspective of we the people. This is the story of a truck driver from Haiti.
People are thinking this can't go unpunished.
Yes.
John Claude Muse was railroaded in court, locked up in prison, and then freed after our team spent years digging up bombshells.
I love you, baby.
Act 2 was when you were freed,
Yes.
and now there's Act 3.
But Act 3 is yet to come.
And then I heard horns beeping and going crazy horns, and my mom was screaming. The last thing I remember was her saying, "Jesus help us, we're gonna crash."
On May 11th, 2001, near the town of Wauchula, 2 girls lost their mom, Nona Moore, and their 8-year-old little sister, Lindsay. A tractor trailer tipped over and crushed their van, and John Claude Muse was driving that truck.
So troopers found that you were drinking that night.
No. I never drank my whole life.
They found you were doing drugs?
No.
Muse said another driver cut him off, and so he swerved and flipped. He said it was an accident, and so did Nona and Lindsay's loved ones. They begged prosecutors to let it be.
I think the community, they lost 2 precious people that they loved, and they felt like someone had to pay.
And they charged Muse with vehicular homicide because they say he must have dozed off behind the wheel.
Most definitely, he was alert.
Our team discovered volunteer firefighter Juan Otero. He was the first witness on the scene and showed up seconds after the crash.
Look how sharp that curve is. Watch that car. Okay? Dead asleep, you'd come right through here. You wouldn't have tried to make that curve.
But investigators didn't interview Otero, and the jury never heard from him.
Because you're talking about sending a man to prison for so many years on an accident.
As to the question of how Muse can negotiate sharp turns in the road in his sleep, well, the diagram in the court showed that he didn't. But our team also discovered it did not match the measurements troopers took at the scene. That diagram was flawed, and we got an accident reconstruction expert to prove it.
Their own diagram doesn't stand up to the physical evidence.
Still, an all-white jury took less than an hour to convict John Claude, and he got 15 years.
Somebody would step up and help me. All you can say is thank you.
Well, after a series of our team's investigations, let's just say the judge had seen enough.
I hope the example of forgiveness and consideration will lessen your bitterness and allow you to proceed with a productive life.
He overturned the conviction and freed John Claude Muse with time served 9 years ago.
I work, pay my bills, pay my taxes, take care of my family, go to church. I do everything to be a good citizen.
And now he's back to driving trucks, has 1 son heading to college, and a little girl just 5 months old.
So every time she look at me, she smiles. Every time.
But he may have to leave her behind and leave his son who's off to college and everything he's worked for, because there's always a catch. Muse first hit a snag in 2013 under President Obama on a trip to Haiti. Though his conviction was overturned, the feds flagged him for still having that time served on his record. And then President Trump turned up the heat.
We have some bad people in this country that have to go out. We're going to get them out.
The feds don't know his backstory. They just see time served for vehicular homicide. And you know how that looks in the Trump era.
But we have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
And so John Claude Muse, a legal permanent U.S. resident for more than 30 years, who's never had another accident, who's never been charged with any other crime, is facing a hearing to get deported.
I understand you want to kick the child molesters, the rapists, all the bad guys out, but I'm not a bad guy.
You're not a bad hombre?
No. I've been here since I was 17 years old.
By the way, his father just died.
My dad fought for this country in Vietnam.
His father died on a trip to Haiti.
I cannot go to the funeral.
And Jean-Claude can't say goodbye.
I won't be able to go because of the immigration thing.
And after his deportation hearing, we may never see him again, and his little girl Jael may never even remember him.
I want to remember that I'm a hard worker. If I was in the country, I would have provided for her. And I want her to grow up to be somebody.
He's hoping, under the circumstances, a judge may vacate that time served on his record. But with backlog courts and time running out, that won't be easy.
And I want them to open their heart again. If they have somebody in a high place, try to help me.
And so he leaves us, and may soon leave us for good, with a now familiar cry for help.
I want anybody that can help me to look to see what's happened in my case.
Well, Senator Marco Rubio had no comment about this case. Senator Bill Nelson did not respond. Muse's Congresswoman Lois Frankel did not respond. And Jean-Claude Muse is still waiting to learn his fate. Coming up, a jury convicted this mentally challenged deaf man in a trial he says he could not hear. He got a life sentence, though he had an alibi, and his brother confessed to framing him.
He choked me. They're coming. I'm trying to holler. I can't holler. They come in. They grab me. One hit me. I try to fight. I can't fight. I pets out. They rape me there.
Felix Garcia was a favored target for bullies and rapists because he did not run. He could not hear them coming.
Stab there. Stab there.
When we met this deaf man in a North Florida prison, he showed us how they gave him a hearing aid, which would have been nice if it had batteries.
No battery.
Felix once tried to end his life sentence with a bedsheet.
Wrapped it around his head and jumped off the bed and was hanging there when an officer finally came in and cut it down, and he passed out.
Felix says he was set up by his own brother for a crime he did not commit, and he could not even hear his own trial. The court-appointed ear doctor said he was 70% deaf at the time.
There's nothing there. There's nothing there to hear with.
Tests have shown he has the reading and listening skills of a child.
They got too bad, too bad.
And his friend and advocate, Pat Bliss, says that's how it all got started.
He thinks hearing people are so smart that he wants to trying to compete that he's smart too. He just would smile and nod, pretending he understood everything, so he wouldn't appear stupid.
At my trial, the judge said, "Can you hear me?" I said, "Yes." But I didn't tell what it means.
And so Felix Garcia took the stand with no sign language interpreter, answering questions that he later said he could not hear, nodding and repeatedly saying, "Yes, sir," at times incriminating himself, unaware that his own family accused him of murder. His attorney, Reggie Garcia, who's not related, took up his case for free.
He was played as a patsy, and he frankly fell right into it.
Prosecutors said Felix Garcia walked into a North Tampa hotel room back in 1981, shot a guest in the head, and then laughed in his face. His own brother and sister said he did it, and the jury agreed.
I never meet the man. Never.
But then years later, these affidavits suggest his brother and sister changed their stories. Signed affidavits claim their disabled brother was framed to get the real killer off the hook.
You gave me here, I almost died. You know you're wrong.
Felix's older brother Frank later said he committed the crime, along with this man, Ray Stanley, who's now deceased. Detectives found Ray Stanley wearing the dead man's watch, and they found 13 of Frank's fingerprints at the crime scene and no prints from Felix.
He had a 7-hour alibi that night.
Felix's ex-girlfriend and her mother swore he was at their home on Minnehaha Street, nearly 6 miles away from the hotel when the killer struck. Felix signed for a pizza delivery at their house that night, and they all recalled the movie they watched on TV.
Godfather. First time on TV.
That's an important point, because the ex-girlfriend, her mother, and Felix all recalled arguing over whether to watch Godfather or Motel Hell. And the TV Guide shows those two movies only aired at the same time, at the time the victim was murdered 6 miles away, and Felix had no car.
Listen to me. I ain't know that man. I never beat that man. How? You blame me?
But Felix did sign a pawn slip for the dead man's ring, and that one piece of physical evidence combined with the testimony sealed his fate.
I feel it.
Felix claims his brother Frank drove him to a pawn shop and tricked him into signing for that ring.
Science. Why'd you?
And Frank later claimed he framed his little brother to save himself from the electric chair and protect Ray Stanley. And according to this signed affidavit, their sister Tina backed that up. It claims Ray Stanley beat her, made her work on the streets for him, made him marry her 8 days after the murder so she could not testify against him, and threatened to kill her if they did not pin it on Felix, the teenage brother with tumors between his ears.
Easy win. He's sick. He's gonna die. He got tumor. We can't help him.
Even though his brother confessed, Felix never got a new trial. And his sister Tina told us she thinks Felix is guilty and that she does not remember signing an affidavit pinning it on Stanley, even though it was notarized.
But did I sign an affidavit? I do not remember, and I don't believe I signed one.
She told us Ray Stanley was her pimp, hooked her on crack, and often beat her.
Pistol whipped me, hit me on the side of my head with a gun.
But she said Stanley was with her at home the night of the murder, while her brothers borrowed her car.
Felix was always a little off.
After our interview with Felix, the state transferred him to a prison in Virginia. Pat Bliss says it's better equipped to deal with his disability. Meanwhile, Hillsborough County elected a new state attorney.
Thank you.
Andrew Warren ran on creating a conviction integrity unit to re-examine cases to review questionable convictions. But his spokeswoman said Warren is not ready to talk about Felix Garcia yet, as Felix waits and hopes for the possibility of a new trial or a shot at parole.
Please give me one, please. That's the only way the truth will come out.
In September of 2017, Felix's request for parole was denied. He plans to try again in a couple of years. Coming up, a Central Florida man won his appeal and a judge set him free, but after turning his life around, the state wanted him back.
It just can't happen. It just can't. I don't even want to think about what to say because it just can't happen. I love you. I'm sorry this is happening to you.
I don't want to bust your window out. You better catch it.
This is the story of a mom named Stephanie, 2 little boys, Robbie and Lance, who aren't so little anymore, and their father, Robert Woodall.
He does everything for us.
Okay, Robbie.
He promised to never leave them again.
Say hi. I hope I was able to be a good influence.
Actually, they left him. 12 years ago, Stephanie gave birth to Lance, developed postpartum depression, left Robert, and took the boys off to Texas.
I watched them out the window, and as they turned the corner, I just broke out and cried. And
so his buddies took him out drinking, and on Christmas Eve 2004, he made the biggest mistake of his life.
So everybody says they don't think they're drunk, but yeah, I definitely had a few drinks in the club.
He got in a tiff with some men in an elevator. A security guard broke it up, but he found them again. He bashed one man in the face, broke his nose, and pulled a gun on another.
Pointed the gun at the ground and fired 2 shots. I figured that would stop them, and it did.
A bullet ricocheted off the ground and struck the man's ankle. The victim with a broken nose asked the court to show a degree of clemency to Robert for the sake of his kids. But the judge had no flexibility for aggravated assault with a firearm. That's an automatic 20 years in prison.
They don't do that anymore.
The courts later struck part of Florida's 1020 life law, and state lawmakers changed it more to give judges more discretion. And after Robert Woodall served 11 years,
ooh, good spiral. Who taught you how to throw like that?
A judge used his discretion to set him free.
And he made a decision in that courtroom and set me free. And I got to come home.
In January 2016, the judge ruled there had been an error in his conviction and released him on appeal.
Because he came home telling the kids he would never go back. He would never do anything like that to leave.
And that was my promise to them.
And he worked hard to keep that promise.
I get to be with my family. I get to be a father.
He poured his savings into a lawn business, then poured his sweat into keeping it going. And after yard work, he found volunteer work.
He's got us going to church. He's got us, involved in the schools.
And along the way, the boys' grades and spirits picked up.
He teaches us stuff about God and how to do stuff and basically how to live.
Camo in the middle.
This would be the story of a man who redeemed himself and brought his family back together.
Go to your mom.
Except for a twist.
It just can't happen. It just can't. I don't even want to think about what to say because it just can't happen.
While the state changed 1020 life, the changes don't apply to people who had already been sentenced. And State Attorney General Pam Bondi's office said 20 years means 20 years. Her office convinced an appeals court the judge had no discretion to show discretion.
So the court is compelling you to serve 9 more years on a law that's since been deemed unconstitutional that the governor has changed.
Correct.
Which brings us to this.
That's for people with a higher pay grade than me.
The man who spent 16 months in freedom, showing how he's a changed man, got 9 more years in prison.
He didn't do anything wrong. He's been over a year and he hasn't done anything wrong.
Attorney General Pam Bondi would not talk to us about this case, nor would anyone in her office. Her spokeswoman replied, "No one is available, though we've been asking since August." But while Bondi won't touch this one, there are still 2 sides to every story. And this one started long before Woodall's crime.
We had record high crime in Florida.
When State Senator Jack Ledvala helped pass the 1020 life law nearly 20 years ago.
What we did is we produced 46-year low in our crime rate to make our families, our neighborhoods safer.
Remember, the court did convict Woodall of aggravated assault with a firearm, and he did bash a man in the face on Christmas Eve, and the court only struck part of 1020 life, and he did get 20 years.
I don't see any particular reason to retroactively lighten the load.
While Ledvala is not familiar with Woodall's case, he says changes in the mandatory sentencing law should not apply to those who were already sentenced.
These are bad guys. We took them off the street. And I think they need to stay off the street.
Of course, some like Senator Darrell Roussan disagree.
I think it's wrong for the state to do that.
And that's driving this ongoing debate over mandatory minimums.
We must get away from the mentality of purely mandatory sentencing imprisonment. That's why we need to give judges a certain amount of discretion.
As for Robert, no matter how you feel about him, his victim had asked for some clemency for his family. But as Robert and the judge heard Stephanie's cries cut through the walls, under state law, the judge had no clemency to give.
He's not the bad guy. You think you stuck it to him? You think you stuck it to him? You stuck it to him? You did it to us. You did this to us. The other side. That's who you stuck it to.
That may give lawmakers something to think about on both sides as they consider what judges consider in handing out Florida justice, while Robert Woodall's promise to his kids may have to wait until long after they're grown.
And that I always love them. And then I'll never stop trying to come home to them.
The Florida Supreme Court denied Woodall's appeal. Coming up, this woman from Jacksonville said she fired a warning shot to fend off an attack. Then she faced Florida justice.
The George Zimmerman trial was a flashpoint on guns, race, and Florida justice.
No justice,
no peace.
Protests and marches continue today across the country.
But to all the protesters who said it showed how our self-defense laws favor the shooter, meet Marissa Alexander.
Put George Zimmerman in Marissa's shoes, he probably would have been convicted with a 2-day trial.
This mother from Jacksonville could not follow the Zimmerman case much at the time because she was serving a 20-year sentence, she says, for standing her ground without shooting anybody.
The worst was when I was pregnant.
Back in 2010, she said her estranged husband beat her.
He headbutted me. I remember my shirt being ripped. He threw me over a bed.
Threw you over a bed?
Yeah.
When you were pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
So she got a restraining order. Then 9 days after she gave birth to their little girl, her husband showed up.
He said he'll kill me.
She ran into the garage, but says she could not leave.
The garage wouldn't go up. I didn't have my key. 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 I didn't have my key It was unbelievable. It was like something out of a movie.
She took the gun she legally owned, walked back into her own home, and says she fired a warning shot into the wall to scare him away.
I was in fear, and so I thought this is the best I could do.
And that's how Marissa Alexander got that 20-year sentence.
I know I'm not getting ready to do 20 years.
No, the verdict was thrown out in 2013 because the jury got bad instructions. But instead of seeking 20 years at her new trial, the state demanded more.
60.
Beg your pardon?
60 years.
60 years?
Yeah.
So facing 60 years for what she calls a warning shot, she took a plea deal, served her time, and got released. And her story drove a hot debate at the Capitol over our stand your ground law.
That choice that I made that day, I wouldn't change it. It was the best I could do.
So lawmakers passed a bill to make it easier to claim self-defense. Instead of the shooters having to prove they are in fear for their lives, prosecutors would have to prove they were not.
Governor Rick Scott signed the change into law, and that triggered yet another dispute in court. And we'll take you through it on our YouTube channel. Search for Craig Patrick's Money, Power, and Politics and click subscribe. Thank you for watching our look at Florida justice from the perspective of we the people.